Welcome to episode 2 of 2D Game Art for Developers. Last time we looked at how to create artwork and game assets using circle shapes. Today we'll explore a bit further on about how to create artwork or game assets using rectangular or square shapes. But first, let me create a new artboard. Now, Affinity has the concept of artboards where you can have different artboards suitable for a specific size, where you can create artwork. Now, our cat image and the bear image, as you can see in the layers panel, is on artboard 1, but this artboard is too big for the actual images we created. So let's first resize the artboard. To do that, we go to the artboard tool and you can click on your artboard and you can change the size. Now we didn't really need to do that, but in this case I just wanted to show the artboard tool and also show you how you can create a second artboard. Now before you create a second artboard, let's call this artboard circles. Let's say now we want to do images which are composed of squares or rectangles today. Now one of the most common examples of square images in game assets is tiles. Now there's this tile map editor called Tiled, which allows you to create a huge screen or a scene using a couple of different tiles. For instance, you can see this map where a continent or a landmass is created using maybe 5 to 15 different tiles: the grass tile, the edge tiles, the water tiles, the land tiles, and so on. So this is one specific case where you could create uh, use squares or rectangles to create game assets, which are to create game assets which would let you create something like this. Now the issue with tile games is that tiles, you first have to figure out which orientation you're looking at. For instance, like this is top down, but you could also have something like this, which is a sideways view. What you create for land tiles from the top down would be different to what you would want to create from a side view. From top down, a grass tile is simply green, a green square. But from the side view, the grass is just part of one land tile. So we first have to figure out which type of tile we are going for. Let's say for our game, we are going to do uh, a top-down view. So let's take a look here. Now also let's say for our game we want to use the characters we've created, the cat and the bear. In this case, the tile probably should be big enough to hold the character. So if you look down here in the transform palette, you will notice that the now the sizes are given in millimeters. This probably is because of the document set up in Affinity. So let's go and change it so that we have it in pixels or points, which is easier to work with than millimeters. So for that, we go up to the file menu, select document setup, and go up here where it says document units, and let's change it to points, and we say okay. And now down here you see that the cat is 109.4 points by 125.4 points. So let's say our tile is going to be 125 by 125 points. So let's create another artboard. Let's call it squares, and we can set the size for the artboard directly here, 125 width and 125 height. Okay, now let's start adding some square based images. If we switch back to our previous image here for the tile map, let's try to do a grassy tile. So now one thing we can do easily, let's actually open this image. Okay, we can't open that image. Okay, so let's get this image so that we can zoom in a little bit on it. And if you look at it, the grassy tile seems to be simply green with maybe a slight hint of uh, some sort of texturing. So the easiest style you could obviously make would be to use you select the rectangle tool and you draw a square. We can, since we want it to fit the whole artboard, we make it 125 by 125 by setting the width specifically, and we can set the x value to 0 and y value to 0 so that it fits the artboard exactly. Now we need to set a color. Let's pick a green, something like this, but as you noticed the color did not change. That's because the square was not selected. So let's select the square and now we can set the color. So that looks a little grassy, right? So that's the easiest way to make a tile, but that does not have a lot of character. So how if we added a little bit more uh, character to it? Let's duplicate this tile. I'm going to turn off this layer, the first layer, after I rename the second one. Let's call this grass with character. Let's turn off the first grass layer. Okay, so one thing you can do would be to use the rectangular tool again and you draw something. Of course it does not appear because it's the same color, so let's make it a little darker, and you can convert it to curves, and then you can go to the node tool, drag this out a bit. You can tap anywhere on a path to add a second node like this. Okay, that looks a little bit like a tuft of grass, right? So you can that makes you, like, obviously if you like, I can zoom out a little bit to see whether it looks okay, and it really does not, because it looks as if it's more like an animal footprint than grass. So how can we give this character? One thing would be probably maybe make it lighter, which makes it look a bit more grassy than as if it's a depression in the ground. And of course the straight lines also kind of make it look a little uh, let's say artificial, but that can be corrected by making the lines curve out a little bit like this. Now that looks a little bit more organic and plant-like, right? And let's say you want to have more than one tuft of grass. Of course, you can simply select a tuft of grass and duplicate it. But another way you can do it is use the move tool, hold down the alt key and drag, and you get another copy. Do the same thing, do it, do it again, do it again, and so on. It's simple enough to duplicate this and create a new copy anywhere by simply holding the object and dragging with the alt key down. And now that we have all of these, let's select it all and group it, and you will notice that the name goes away for the tile because that's now part of a group. Let's copy the name from there and we paste it in, and we have a new tile. Okay, so that was simple enough, right? How about we try our hand at creating some earth tiles? Let's duplicate the grass tile, the plain grass tile, and make it visible. And if we change the color, that's an earth tile. But again, it's not got a lot of character. How if we added some stones to it? Okay, let's call this plain earth, and we'll create another one called earth with stones. Let's hide the plain earth one, and okay, earth with stones. Now there's another tile called rounded rectangle. Oh, sorry, another tool, a shape tool called rounded rectangle. So let's drag out a rounded rectangle, and that again does not show anything, so let's make it a slightly lighter version. Does that look like a stone? Nope, it looks more like a brick. But let's add a few more of these. Okay, that does give it a little bit of character, but let's say we want the stones to look a little more textured, as if they are rounded. Let's remove all the extra stones, keep one, and let's add another rectangle in here on top of that, like this. Make it a little bit lighter, not that light, I guess. And let's zoom in on that tile. Now, I showed you yesterday, I talked about how you could use Shift Command 0 to zoom in on the currently selected item. The other way to zoom in on a specific item is to just double tap it in the layers panel, and here we have it. So now what we really want to do is take this, the highlighting that we added, move it up a little bit, resize it so that it's something like this, and then shape it. Let's convert to curves, use the node tool, something like this. What does it look like? Let's see. Okay, that looks a little nicer, doesn't it? We can even add a little bit more texture in there by adding a few spots to the stone, something like. and then we can combine those elements together and call it stone. And we can combine that with the earth with stones big tile to create one earth with stones tile layer. And then let's say we want to create a few more of these on the earth tile. Simply drag it. But then if you have the same kind of stone, it looks a little, repetitive. So let's try a different version. Like, let's take this one and maybe zoom in, and then maybe try changing the size of this. Move it here, add a few more, round this out a little bit. Make it a little uneven. Create another copy somewhere here, smaller. Get rid of this. And if we zoom out, now that looks different. Now let's make a few more copies of that. And maybe size it differently. And if you zoom out a little bit so that you can see what it looks like, that looks not heaps better but slightly better. So it's just a matter of tweaking it till you get a good look. Now what about rocky earth? Maybe we want something which is just not just full of stones. Let's see whether try our hands out at that. Let's duplicate this plain earth. Let's call it rocky, and let's hide this one and make this visible. And then let's take a rectangle and draw out a rectangle and turn it into a curve, and use the node tool to give it a little bit of shape. Let's make it a little darker. That's probably. And maybe let's say we give it some circles in there to give it a rocky texture. and we fill it. Oops. We give it a porous rock-like texture, maybe something like this. Let's say that looks like a pizza, doesn't it? Okay, so what if we give this an edge? We take all this and the curve. Apparently we have three versions of the curve, so I must have dragged it. So let's group all this, get rid of these two versions, and let's say we try to give this some sort of a slight edge. We can use the outer shadow and give it like 1 pixel, and it gives it a bit of a hard edge. So then, sorry, like just to explain that you can add effects to any layer in Affinity Designer. So you can go into the layer effects panel by using the layer effects button down here, and then you can select from a bunch of different effects. I believe I have Gaussian blur on as well. So when I remove the Gaussian blur, it looks slightly different. If you notice, I can zoom in a little bit so that you can see clearer. When I add the Gaussian blur, it gives it a slightly blurry edge, and without the outer shadow that's not prominent, but now it's much more prominent, that you know it has a harder edge which makes it look a bit more like a stone. So let's copy this and do something with each shape so that it looks slightly different. Something like this, and we just readjust the spots a little bit. Maybe make it less spotty. Oops. This is always the problem, like if you are working with multiple layers, depending on what you have selected, what you think you're working on might not actually be what you're working on or what you're modifying. And let's say I take this shape, and if you want to rotate it, you just move to one of the corners, and you'll notice your arrow cursor turns into a double-headed turn cursor, so you can turn it something like this and add it there. And let's say we take this and we turn it all the way like this and put it there. Of course, the number of spots probably has to be reduced for it to look really good, but you get the idea. Like, you can simply create rocky ground by adding different rocky shapes, fill the square, and then you get a slightly different look or a feel. And of course, most of these rocks look a little unnatural because of the straight edges, so you would really need to round it out a little bit to give it a more natural shape. But that can be done again with the node tool by simply dragging on the edges and playing with the nodes, or adding a few more to give it a little bit more texture or shape. And that's about it. Like, once you're done, you should have a bunch of different terrain tiles, and then you can also create terrains where you have, like, let's say you wanted a side view, then you'd obviously take something like, let me just create a group with this and name it correctly. And then let's take our initial okay, I think I got that one. I missed out terrain somewhere, or I mixed two different earth with stones and the rocky one. Now let's say you made a mistake in creating a group. You can just go Shift Command G. Nope, that was not it. So I think I need to find the command actually. It's ungroup is Shift Command G. So it should have worked, but it did not. There we go. Shift Command J. So then we leave earth with stones and take this, all this, and rocky, and Command G, and we call this rocky. Okay. And as I was saying, let's disable that one. Take the plain earth and duplicate it, and say for side view, we can have earth with grass, in which case the grass would simply be a layer of green towards the top, something like this. And this is another thing, like if you're trying to draw, etc., and you keep moving the layer underneath, you can always lock that layer by simply going here and using the lock unlock uh, icon. Let me replace that, and let's say we lock the earth with grass layer, and now we can simply draw something here, which did not work because our layer is locked. So let's unlock that layer and let's just draw here. Let's say I draw something like this, mark it green, and then I can move it into position. Or if you want exact positioning, you can just go here. If you notice, this the colored square means that all your positioning is from the top left corner, and I'm saying place it at 0 0, and then you can resize it, and that basically is earth with grass, a very simplistic earth with grass. Then you can add a little bit of extra stuff to the grass, like you can add some highlighting, you can add some rocks to the earth, you can even make the grass layer lower. Let's say we make it a little bit shorter. We can take the bottom layer and hide that as well. Then you can use another square, draw it on here, turn it into a curve, then add some tufts of grass. We can duplicate that, and something like that. So there are multiple ways you can create tiles using just the basic shapes that you know of. That should, and of course, again, you can use the previous trick of coloring stuff. Like, let's take all of this. Grass, and let's say we add an effects layer so that you can give it a slightly different look. So that you can play around with what looks nice. Let's say you like the tone that you get for the green here, but you don't like the blue. There's also a way to, of course, you don't want the grass and the earth to be blue. But let's try a different combination. Okay, let's say you like the earth color here, but you don't like the grassy color because it's too washed out. You can do this, where you select, you can go to the closed out mode where you have the adjustment layer displaying here, and you can drag it out so that it becomes a separate layer. Then you can just edit, oops, like this above the layer or layers that you want affected, so that only that particular sub layer is affected by the adjustment and not all of it. Now if you drag it up here, you'll notice I messed it up again. All of it is affected, the grass as well as the earth. But if you drag it down here, or rather here, then only the earth is affected. So that's something to keep in mind. That should give you enough stuff to play with. Next time we'll take a look at something else, maybe the gradient tool, to see how you can combine this with the gradients to get even better looking game art. Till then, have fun. See ya.